Eaters of the Dead. Fantastic book, wonderful story. I really, really liked it. This is, of course, part of the Michael Crichton read along or reread, whichever one you prefer to call it. I'm doing the Michael Crichton read along, although in this case, this actually is a reread for me. I read this book once before. But if you check out Mike's book reviews, his channel, he's calling it the Great Michael Crichton reread. Because he's read all of these books before. So I highly recommend you go check out his channel. It is fantastic. And also check out his playlist and his reviews for these Michael Crichton books. You can check out the card above me, and then also I will put a card in a few more seconds for this playlist on my channel of my Michael Crichton read along. Oh, there it is. There it is. All right, check it out, you guys. Now, I actually read this book once before, probably 7 years ago, more or less. That was kind of just when I was first getting really into reading. My brother gave me this book, and I read it, and I actually had a few problems with it. I thought it was good, but then I ended up not keeping it. I didn't. It was the kind of thing where, like, yeah, I'm glad I read it, but I don't want to own a copy. Uh, there were just some issues with it, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. So I actually gave it away, and then it turns out I read it again for this whole Michael Crichton reread, and I didn't have a copy of my own to read. So I read a library copy, so I don't have a. I actually read a digital loan from the library, so I don't have anything to show you. But check it out; it's a great book, and let's jump in. So actually, I want to start at the end. Not the end of the story, but actually the sort of epilogue afterward thing that Michael Crichton added into a later edition of the book. So as you're reading through the story, you might notice, if you're particularly observant, I didn't notice it the first time, but if you pay close attention, you might notice this story seems kind of familiar. And at the very end of the book, Michael Crichton sort of reveals that he wrote this book on a dare. A friend of his was giving a professor was giving a class called the Great Bores, and he was studying these different these different pieces of literature that really no one would read for their own enjoyment because they were boring. And the guy told him, first on the list is Beowulf. And Michael Crichton was like, whoa, 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 what? Beowulf is awesome. It's not boring. And the guy sort of challenged him to try to rewrite Beowulf in a way that would not be super dull. Because the guy said it was just the most boring story ever. And if you've read Beowulf, maybe you feel that way. It's a really cool story, but it is written in sort of a dry way, I have to admit. So anyway, Michael Crichton started doing all this research, and he went to rewrite Beowulf, and he succeeded. The way he ended up doing that is that he rewrote it from the perspective of an outsider, this Arab Muslim guy who comes and visits these Vikings in the north. And the person he chose to be that narrator is an actual historical figure. It's actually super interesting, the whole background behind the story. If you look up this guy, his name was Ibn Fadlan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it. It's IBN. Ibn Fadlan or Fadlan, something like that. He was a real person who lived about 1,000 years ago, a little more than 1,000 years ago, and he did visit the Vikings, and he wrote about his travels and the things he saw. And it's actually from him that we get a lot of information about the ancient Vikings. A lot of what we know comes from this guy. Apparently, he was like the first person to ever write about a Viking funeral, I think. I read somewhere that either his account is the oldest we have, or it's the only like original account that we have of someone witnessing the whole burning of the pyre and the human sacrifice during a Viking funeral. So it's really, really just tremendously interesting. And so I'm really impressed with the way Michael Crichton was able to blend this real historical figure and this real historical event and mix in this sort of fantastical, magical idea of this kingdom being attacked by these scary monsters, and mix it in with the whole Beowulf legend. And of course, like any author, in order to make this work, he had to take some liberties and stuff. So it's not 100% like cohesive. The story of Beowulf actually is supposed to have taken place quite a bit earlier than this guy Ibn Fadlan was alive. But you could look over that. It's not a big deal, you guys. Actually, what's really interesting is the first three chapters of this book are basically just the exact writings of this guy. I don't want to keep saying his name because I'm probably saying it wrong. This is the last time I'll say it. Ibn Fadlan. Michael Crichton basically just took what this guy wrote and made it into the first three chapters of the book. And then from there, he elaborated and sort of added to it and tried his best to write in that same style. And so if you actually look up the historical documents of what this guy wrote, it's pretty much just the beginning of this book. So in the book, he leaves Baghdad and he goes and he travels up the river to this settlement, and he's supposed to be going to see the Volgas, a city or a community of Viking people that had just been converted to Islam. But he gets a little detoured. He meets this guy named Bullywhiff, who, if you think that sounds similar to Beowulf, you would be correct. And he sort of gets pulled on this adventure with this guy Bullywhiff and his company of warriors, and they go and they help this king named Hrothgar, who, hey, that sounds really similar to Hrothgar, right? In Beowulf, the king is Hrothgar with an H at the beginning, and in this story, it's just Hrothgar. It's spelled exactly the same way, except doesn't have an H at the beginning. And they go, and his kingdom is being attacked by these dark, mysterious mist monsters, these creatures that come out of the night, and they're called the Wendel, which is, again, if you're familiar with Beowulf, sounds a lot like Grendel. And so Bullywhiff and also this Arabian guy does his best to help. Bullywhiff and his warriors, they fight off these mist monsters, and then later they actually go to the mist monsters' sort of settlement, their camp, their home territory, and they attack them there. And it's a pretty darn good story. I really liked it. It's a lot of adventure, a lot of action, and there's also some mystery to it, right? Because they don't really know what these monsters are. They are terrified of them, but they don't really understand them. The prose. The characters I thought were really well written. So this is the Michael Crichton read-along, right? Andromeda Strain was the first book. Pretty poor characterization, if I'm being honest. The Terminal Man was not terrible, but also not that fantastic. And then The Great Train Robbery was just, I felt, miles ahead, just so much better and so much more enjoyable as far as like the characters. They were written like real people. And then actually, I think Beowulf, Beowulf, Eaters of the Dead, I think of it as basically Beowulf, sorry. Eaters of the Dead, I think, even tops The Great Train Robbery. It's really well done. You get a lot of understanding of the narrator because he's writing the whole story, right? It's this epistolary format. It's like his journals is the book, and or his journals are the book, I should have said. And so obviously you get a pretty firm understanding of this guy and the way he looks at Vikings through his, I guess, more sophisticated, more cultured lens. He sees them as very much barbarians. But we also learn a lot about this guy Bullywhiff. We learn a lot about Wiglaf. We learn about Hrothgar. We learn about Herger. Several of these characters really are well developed. Now, as this is a group of 13 warriors that are having this adventure, not all of them are super well developed, right? That would be, I think, too much to ask. But it really reminds me a lot of like The Hobbit. We have 13 dwarves, and in this story we have 13 Viking warriors, or 12 Viking warriors and one Arab guy. So just like in The Hobbit, a few of those characters are pretty well developed, and the rest are kind of filler. You see basically the same situation going on in this story, which I'm totally fine with. You get a good feel for a few of these guys, and the rest, they just kind of fill in the spaces, which is okay, because a bunch of them die anyway. Spoiler alert. Another pro... well, actually, I think this kind of goes in the pros and cons. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this, but the real world connection, in the pro category, the real world connection is this narrator, right? He was a real historical figure, and it connects to the real world. His real observations of these Viking people and his thoughts and his perceptions and all this stuff. I love that. There's something at the very end of the book, and I don't want to spoil it at all, but where they kill some of these mist monsters, and this narrator gets a chance to look at them up close, and there is sort of a real-world connection of what these monsters may or may not be. And that, to me, is a little bit of a con. I kind of like the idea, but at the same time, it takes away the mystery. It takes away the horror. It takes away that supernatural aspect of the story, because it's like, oh, these mist monsters actually were just this thing, which is totally not supernatural at all. So I don't know. I kind of like the idea, like I said, but at the same time, maybe not. I really like the original Beowulf because Grendel is a monster. His mother is a monster, right? They're these freakish things that nobody understands, and they're almost indestructible. They're almost impossible to defeat, and it's scary. So yeah. Now on the con side, I'm going to keep this video pretty short. Just a couple pros. Well, I guess it's just another pro is that it's a freaking good book. It's just fun. It flows. It's short. It's quick. It's like 200 pages, and it just flies by, right? Because it's just action-packed. A lot of action, a lot of very interesting things going on. So I guess that would be another pro. But on the con side, I I don't know. Anybody who knows me, and I've said it in some of my other videos, I'm a prude. I'm not really interested in reading a lot about sex. And there's a good amount of sexuality in this. There's nothing explicit because it is written from the perspective of like um, an Orthodox Muslim guy, right? So he's not going to be like dirty and gritty and like explaining these details in like some sort of perverted way, but he does mention and this guy was doing this over there, and he talks about how the Vikings would just like have sex in the room with other people, that like they're at a feast and like you just go over to the side and just like have sex with a slave girl. And that's interesting, right? And it's like, okay, that's a different culture. That's really odd. But then, like after like the ninth time he mentions it, I'm like, do I need to keep knowing about this is happening in the room? Like, do you have to keep mentioning it? And that's not the only thing. There's several things that like he just kind of keeps bringing it up. And like I said, it's never explicit. It's not like Game of Thrones or anything like that. But at the same time, it's like, do I need to be do you need to keep mentioning this? I'd rather you not. But that's just my own personal little quibble. I think most people would not find this to be overly sexualized. I don't think most people would find this to be like gross or anything like that. I didn't think it was gross. It was just, it's just not what I'm into reading. But anyway, overall, I'd give this book, I don't know, probably like a 9 out of 10. It was a really good book, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think probably other people would enjoy it, and I would recommend it to anybody who likes a lot of action, a little bit of mystery, a little bit of horror. It was kind of, there's some parts that'll definitely give you a little bit of chills down your spine. So check it out, Eaters of the Dead. And next month, we've got coming up Congo. I'm excited to read this one because I remember seeing just a little bit of the movie when I was a kid, and it was scary, and I literally only saw like 5 minutes of it. I never watched scary movies as a kid, so it was like too scary for me. Oh, the baby's awake. Anyway, you guys, next month is Congo. I'm out of here. Don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere, you guys. One thing I totally forgot to mention in the video, it just slipped my mind. The funniest thing, at the end of Michael Crichton books, he usually, or almost always, I think, includes a list of references. He's a true scholar, right? But in this book, a lot of them are made up. A lot of them are just fictitious things. And one of them really made me laugh. It's something I did not notice the first time I read this book, but I totally caught it this time because since then I've read a lot of this author. One of the references at the back of Eaters of the Dead is the Necronomicon by Abdul al-Hazred. And then it's listed editor H.P. Lovecraft, which I think is hilarious. So if you don't know H.P. Lovecraft, the Necronomicon is this fictional book that he made up, and it appears in a lot of his stories. And it was supposedly written by this mad Arab, Abdul al-Hazred. And if you read the book, it drives you mad, and it's just a cool piece of lore. But I thought, sorry, I got light shining on my face. I just thought it was hilarious that Michael Crichton included it as one of his references for Eaters of the Dead.